Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on building a sustainable workforce, greening the built environment. Just so everyone knows, and if anyone's joining a bit late, the session will be recorded and shared as shorter video segments so you can click through to any bits that you are particularly interested in. By way of introduction, I am Izzy and I'm an associate at Brighteye, which is an edtech focused VC investing at seed and Series A stages in European-based companies. This session and this report has been developed in collaboration with UFI, so I shall quickly hand over to Elisaid from UFI, who will introduce herself.
Hi everyone. I'm Elisaid. I'm an associate at UFI Ventures. We are a UK-based fund looking at what we call vocational technology, but that is essentially providing the skills for work. We focus in particularly quite interested, like Brighteye, in this area of kind of green skills and the growth of the sector.
Fantastic, thank you, Elisaid. So we have an exciting agenda to come for the next hour and a half or so. We are going to start off the session with a quick run through of some of our key findings from the report. So we'll look at the size of the skills gap itself, we'll look at some key reasons for this, before going into some details about investor appetite and what startups are doing. We will then have a panel led by Brighteye's own Rhys Spence, followed by a session from 3 exciting startups who will go through some of the challenges that they are tackling in the space and how they are doing so. And just as a reminder to everyone, the report will also go live straight after this event, so you'll be able to kind of dig your teeth through that at a later point in time. So to start with, why we were excited by this topic and why we decided to dive into it. Given the fact that buildings account for 40% of global energy consumption and 20% of global water consumption, our ability to achieve net zero targets really relies heavily on our ability to sufficiently improve the efficiency of our buildings. The IEA notes that energy efficiency measures have the potential to cut energy consumption by half, highlighting the significant impact of adopting efficient practices in homes. As it can be seen in this diagram, there are a wide array of measures that can be taken to improve the energy efficiency of our building stock. Buildings can be made greener or more energy efficient in a range of ways, from solar panel installation to energy efficient appliances to heating and cooling systems. Given that Brighteye is an edtech focused VC, this report focuses on the human capital requirements for greening our built environment. In particular, it's focused on the skills requirement for construction of buildings and for retrofit. We've honed in on particular parts of this, depending on where we feel that the skills gaps in particular may constrain our ability to meet targets, and therefore where we think the startups in this space may be able to have a greater impact. For example, in the installation and maintenance of heating and cooling systems and solar panels. So to date, there's not really been a strong pull from homeowners to undertake retrofit. We surveyed a number of startups and consultancies operating within this space, and we found that the key reasons for this being were a lack of cost, a lack of awareness, cost, availability of experts, and worries about effectiveness. However, we are starting to see a change of direction, with the policy direction being particularly clear. For example, the European Green Deal, the Energy Company Obligation and Building Regulations in the UK, and the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, and so on, all featuring specific green building policies and varying levels of support. This is now starting to take effect, and gradually we are starting to see signs of an emerging shortage of skills, really leaving us ill-equipped to meet growing demand. The transition is not entirely straightforward, however. For example, heat pump sales in 14 European countries fell by around 5% overall in 2023 compared to 2022, reversing the trend of a decade. This shows that macro factors are also playing a role. So, the growing demand for energy efficient solutions, as outlined on the previous slide, in combination with other factors, such as an inherent shortage in technical and engineering employees and broader structural drivers leading to labour shortages in this space, is contributing towards a large and growing skills gap. A number of roles are necessary to enable the greening of the built environment, but the true scale is really tough to determine, as there is limited visibility on skills projections. It is widely agreed, however, that a large and growing gap does exist, with the European Commission estimating that between 1.7 billion and 4.1 billion euros will need to be invested by 2030 for retraining, reskilling, and upskilling and manufacturing of strategic net zero technologies in Europe. High growth roles with expected shortages include renewable energy specialists, heating system professionals, building design, and construction roles. I will now hand over to Ella Said, who will go deeper into some of the causes of the skill gap itself and discuss some of the opportunities that she's observed based on conversations with corporates.
Yeah, thanks, Izzy. And I think probably what this kind of cycle that you see on the screen shows is more just a slight, essentially in depth of what you were sharing already about how the sort of lack of B2C demand, so the demand constraints in that B2C market, have a knock-on effect to the wider market. And so obviously we know that, a lack of confidence in products, reluctance to purchase, and deferral on spending by homeowners will have a big knock-on effect on the supply constraints. Because if people aren't buying these products, there's no incentive for installers, for example, to train, upskill, reskill their people. But also we know that if there is a reduced demand for these products, it increases the cost of them. So there are lower production levels and poor economies of scale for manufacturers. The unit costs remain high, which also has an impact on sort of ongoing R&D and inflation, but also not just on the product availability side, but also and at a good price, but also on the kind of the wider skills sector. And that is quite crucial, because obviously if there's not a demand for trained labor to be able to, and skilled professionals to be able to deliver on these projects and have the experience to deliver, that also means that there is a lack of people who are able to train others. And that becomes a more systemic problem, because if there's a lack of trainers and a lack of experienced professionals who can show on the job how to do a certain activity, that will then mean that even if and when the B2C demand increases, which we expect it to, there will not be enough supply of skilled workers and experienced workers and trainers in the sector to meet that, which then obviously has a knock-on demand on the price points of these products and services. Now, that is quite a slightly gloomy picture, but it is not the only picture, and that picture is changing. We know that there has been the flattening of this predicted large B2C demand for residential green upgrades, but we know that is not the only sector which is looking at the green built environment and needs skilled professionals to service their growth. And I'll come to some of the sectors which are training, which are investing in people and skills and have opportunities for startups to get involved more broadly before handing back to Izzy to speak more specifically. But I think one of the first things we want to look at is what are some of the kind of key drivers for those what steps can be taken to address those shortages. So we've looked at a whole range of different actors in the sector. We've spoken to them. We've looked at kind of data and research as well. And I think there's a lot that can be done, and a lot is happening. And the picture also across Europe isn't uniform. There are some areas, for example, in Finland, where the picture is quite different in this kind of cycle, where the areas like, for example, in the UK, where we historically have been more stuck in that underinvestment cycle. But the picture across Europe and what can be done is, can be, cross-European. So, for example, support for skills development, training, and education is crucial to addressing skill shortages. Openness to immigration and talent mobility can help fill skills gaps. Involvement in social partners and promoting adult learning opportunities can play a significant role, especially by improving working conditions and offering targeted labour migration policies and support. We know that there's a look at bringing new people into the industry in different ways, whether people who have high skills transferability, low skills transferability, but broad interest in the sector, and that can be hiring solely within the industry or outside of it. But there's also a need for pooling best practices. There are initiatives across Europe which provide plans openly available for cross-sectorally, which allow that people who are looking at this sector to learn from others and to get the best practice available. There's also the championing of bottom-up initiatives, for example, local level greening of apprenticeships to support them to reach scale. So taking local best practice and scaling that up to reach across Europe, and also investment in the trainers programs and training hubs to allow to reduce that kind of systemic issue of having people without the experience. I'm going to quickly speak about also two other sectors where there are opportunities. People are training. There's a lot of investment currently. One is real estate and commercial property development, and the second is within sort of public-private partnerships, both at national and regional level. One area we know that, having spoken to people in the sector, green lending in a high interest rate environment has been unlocking a lot of green commercial refurbishments, because there are lower interest rates offered to green property developments for financing and refinancing their work, meaning that there is, essentially, even where there isn't sort of demand from a B2C sector, there is a driver within the kind of B2B and commercial property development around new build homes, retrofitting office blocks, new buildings, and others in that commercial sector where there is a push for green and green retrofit. What's interesting about this area is that there is, there'll be opportunities to reskill workforce even prior to these contracts going live. But we obviously know that these have a lot longer development cycles than other areas of the built environment. Interestingly, obviously, that it also opens the question about what technology and what kind of educational technology would appeal to this sector. So it's not only training people to get them experience on these big green retrofit projects, but there's also opportunities, I think, looking around selling into this sector with new ways. So, for example, software that flags how designs could be built more sustainably and layering an education to that. Or I've heard about sort of software for troubleshooting and learning whilst on site. So, for example, an installer being able to compare their work to best practice or troubleshoot in real time. Or, for example, platforms to manage supply of materials, so there's better resources around essentially reusing materials in this sector. So again, an area that could, for example, provide more skilled workers and experience to, kind of break that cycle we looked at earlier. And the other one is in sort of the B2B to G space, I might call it, which is working with public-private partnerships in government. I'm going to take a bit of a case study from the UK broadly, but we know that across the UK and across Europe, this is marked across, across the piece in Europe, that the regional governments, national governments are working on joint ventures with private companies in different ways to be able to support the green transition. I think we'll be joined on the panel later by Hannah, who works at Bristol City Leap, which is a joint venture looking around a range of low carbon infrastructure between local government and private company. In the UK, we know that housing associations supported by national government, for example, the UK's Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, are winning large kind of joint venture contracts, bringing in a range of providers to make those transitions. And that's working, for example, on social housing, low-income housing, building heat networks, as well as, and some of that is kind of system-wide and some of that is individual housing-wide. But I think, what we've seen is that the new build housing sector, as well as social housing and low-income housing, has had more investment more recently, particularly in the UK, but across Europe as well, to be able to meet the needs of the green transition. So that's another area where there will be trained professionals coming, opportunities for skilling and providing educational technology as well. But I think obviously there are more opportunities out there. There are more, more interesting cases, and that cycle that we talked about is weakening, and there are, I think we will see growth in this sector growing. And I think maybe that's a good point to hand over back to Izzy to say, where is that growth and who's working and what are they doing?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alisade. That was very insightful. So as the next step, before talking about what some of the startups that we've observed are doing in this space, we'd like to outline the findings from our investor survey. So we summarised 12 investors, and to summarise, there is significant investor interest in investing in companies within the space, with 11 out of the 12 investors engaged in the report actively highlighting that they are exploring green-collar opportunities. Investors highlighted that they see the fulfillment of skills gap being crucial in order for us to achieve climate targets. And impact investors in particular highlighted that they were particularly interested in this space because not only would it enable the green transition, but it would also provide a secondary social impact in that it would unlock greater labour productivity and worker satisfaction. Investors were particularly excited in solutions attracting new people towards green skills professions, tapping into unsourced pools of talent, and also in those creating end-to-end solutions. So, for example, education through to job placement. However, there has been a limited number of deals within this group thus far, with only 4 out of the 12 investors surveyed having made an investment in this space. Lack of scalable solutions and the challenges associated with achieving product market fit were 2 of the core reasons cited. So we then built a market map which covered some of the interesting companies that we'd seen within this space. The axes on the market map segment companies by firstly frequency, and this is the frequency at which users repeat use of the platform, and secondly by the focus of solution, so train, place, and enhance. Solutions in the train category focus on upskilling or reskilling of users. Place focuses on matching individuals with employment opportunities. And enhance includes solutions that improve the productivity and efficiency of labour, upskilling people on the job. The map largely focuses on European-based companies, given this was the focus of the report, but it also includes an example of global companies, where there's been an interesting example that has been observed. All in all, it can be observed that there is a healthy and growing market of startups tackling the workforce challenges and greening the built environment. There is a high density of companies responding to the training demands, with particularly high density in solutions providing high frequency upskilling or enhancing learning. Interestingly, in general, solutions in the train category tended to be used at the lowest frequency. This is largely because the majority of these solutions provide learners with a one-off required certification required to practice in their field of choice, with some also providing opportunities to further upskill throughout their career. Enhanced solutions, on the other hand, tended to be used with much higher frequency. Users are using these solutions sometimes as frequently as multiple times a day in order to carry out actions such as finding new sales leads or to support with design process for their installations, thus becoming a core part of their business operations. There are also early examples of companies that are starting to scale across all 3 segments, and we anticipate that more companies will also follow in this direction. An example of this can be seen in the crossover of solutions sitting between place and enhance. Although some solutions are focused on a particular part of retrofit, we anticipate that as these solutions scale, the vast majority will expand offerings to support users across multiple opportunities, from solar to heat pump installation. This will play an important role in solutions and reaching VC backable market sizes. In this report, we've also outlined several potential opportunities for generating VC scalable opportunities. Considerable opportunities are present when combining a training plus approach. Companies that are providing training, as well as additional ecosystem of support, such as training plus business administration support for small company owners, or training plus productivity tools, or training plus compliance support. These and other opportunities can potentially provide billion-dollar opportunities. In the example on this slide, we can see an opportunity for a company which starts by offering training for new installers. It then might expand to also offer productivity tools for those installers, helping them become more efficient on the job, before also adding a hardware marketplace onto its platform, enabling installers to purchase hardware such as heat pumps for their jobs in a single place. We'll later hear from a few startups who are tackling challenges in this area and who have really exciting opportunities which we see as potentially being VC scalable. I will now pass over to Reese, who will be leading the panel.
Thank you very much, Izzy and Elisaid. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm Reese, Brighteye's head of research. It's been really fun filming this report. One of the most enjoyable parts of these projects is engaging with new people working on important problems. We're very grateful to all the respondents to our investors and startup surveys, as well as the industry-focused experts that responded to requests for interviews, such as CEDAFOP, the European Commission Skills Organization, among several others that we'll also be hearing from shortly. So we're pleased to now dive in with our panelists. We're delighted to have Burhan with us from PT1, a VC with a built environment focus and multiple portfolio companies operating in the green skills space. With Divya from Economist Impact, the Economists Research Group. Divya's worked on green jobs research and green built environment research in that role. With Connor from the Irish Concrete Federation. Connor is head of sustainability, focused on making sure that materials used in the construction sector are sustainably sourced and used. And last but certainly not least, from Hannah from Bristol City Leap and Amoresco, working on a range of programs to invest resources into projects at the forefront of forming a sustainable built environment. I'm very sorry if any of that is misrepresenting, but hopefully it roughly captures the kind of things that you're focused on at the moment. So we'll start with a question for each speaker, and then we'll crack on with more queries. If you have comments or questions, please do share them in the chat, and speakers can either dive in and take them straight away, or we can revisit them. So Burhan, let's start with you. You've worked on a couple of deals in the space, such as Properly and Greenworks. What was it about those companies that helped you reach conviction about both the companies themselves and the markets in which they're operating?
Yeah, great question. So I think if we sort of zoom out slightly, obviously there's that classic venture capital playbook, right, of what company is good, what company is not good, and you've got all your classic drivers about the market size and the team being the right fit for it and so on. So all of that exists, and that's sort of quite important. In addition to that, for us at PT1, we only do sort of 5 to 8 investments a year. And so we're quite a high conviction investor. And so for each investment we make, we have to be really, really certain that A, the team can solve this problem, but B, more broadly, there is a broader thesis we can take on this, and ultimately it's a directional bet, right? You're making a directional bet on, for example, we can't reach net zero because there aren't enough people to install heat pumps, and therefore we need more. That is a directional bet we're making, and then we're betting on the company which can sort of resolve this issue, and also looking at other sort of systemic or factors that are outside of our control which could influence it. So it's quite an interesting space to be in, right? Because ultimately we're reacting to a complex problem and we're seeing what happens there. Specifically, if we look at sort of Greenworks and Properly, both and other companies in our portfolio, they ticked off the classic venture capital drivers. That's the base case. There's a really strong, compelling why now for those. I don't need to go into the green transition narrative. We all know it's a problem. I think this year might be the wettest UK summer ever. We've got El Nino to a La Nina transition going on. We've got we're getting more fat tails in the climate profile because of all the global warming stuff. So there's a lot, we can see the impacts, right? The transition is real, it needs to happen. And so that was important as well. Specifically, then it just becomes, why is the team uniquely suited to deliver on this particular problem? Are there any insights or market edges which they have, which other people are lacking? And then can they deliver fast enough? Because if it's a growing sector, there are other people who will have similar ideas. And so it's that question of why them? And in some cases, the market is so big, you don't need to worry about competitive bets, right? Because you could have 3, 4, 5 huge players winning. In some cases, this works. In other cases, the market it's smaller and it's more cutthroat. And so then you need to really care about, can the team deliver at scale? Can they execute? And can they iterate to actually solve a complex problem? Because again, in this space, it's very often harder than just a classic B2B SaaS, right? You may have a distribution problem. If you're selling to installers, many of them are just 2 people in the van, right? Somewhere in the north of England. And so it's very hard to penetrate them with traditional social media approaches or traditional marketing and distribution channels. Or you may have a physical issue, right? How do I train someone to install a heat pump? I can't do it via you need something physical and tangible. And so you have far more complex problems. And so the teams and the caliber of teams has to be higher. So that's quite a long-winded answer, but I think it's the point is there's a lot of factors to consider, but you need this holistic approach. You can't just optimize for one thing in isolation.
Yeah, so that's a fascinating. It wasn't long-winded at all. It was very concise considering how much stuff you covered. So thank you very much. That first response. Over to Divya now. You've obviously undertaken a lot of research, looking at green jobs in general, with a sub focus on green skills in the built environment. What are the skill sets that you perceive as being most demanded in that process of greening the built environment? And how do they compare to the existing professions and their associated skills requirements? Are they big differences? And what are the skill sets that you see as being most demanded?
Sure. Thanks, Reese. Firstly, for the warm introduction. Very excited to be joining this panel. And I think it's a great question that you've asked. So, in terms of the skills that I feel would be in demand as we sort of move on to the path to decarbonize the built environment or the construction sector, starting off with the most basic ones would be to have like an understanding and to be able to apply principles of sustainable design and construction that minimizes the environmental impact. Like skills in assessing and implementing strategies to reduce the energy consumption of the buildings, and also how do you sort of operate and design more energy efficient appliances, insulation techniques, so and like knowledge, just general knowledge of renewable energy sources. So first would be that. Similarly to that, I would point out on saying having a very robust knowledge and understanding of choosing environmentally friendly materials that obviously reduce the carbon footprint of the buildings that you are designing, as well as enhancing energy efficiency, which could be the materials which could be thrown back into the system are recyclable, thereby contributing to the overall sustainability of your construction project. Coming on to the more hard skills or technical skills, I would say retrofitting or green retrofitting skills, because not all sustainable construction sectors or buildings in general can be made from the scratch. Retrofitting is essential because like you can update the existing buildings with the energy efficient technology, and that sort of reduces the energy consumption and thereby reducing the overall GHG footprint. Then I think one very important skill set that needs a lot of traction, but I feel is not gaining enough popularity, is expertise in effective waste management strategies that would include recycling and reducing materials. Because you need to, like, when you're sort of thinking to decarbonize, the built environment sector, you also need to think, okay, how can I minimize the landfill usage and at the same time promote the circular economy principles. And I think one last category of skill sets that I would like to focus is we all have to realize the importance of soft skills such as communication, awareness, creativity. All the sectors, not just specifically the green built environment sector, is undergoing decarbonization. All the sectors are sort of trying to take their path towards green transition, and there are a lot of job transitions in place. So how would you sort of deal with that job change, job loss, how flexible you are, how agile you are, what is your mindset to sort of transition from one sector to the other? So I think a very important category of skill set is soft skills. So the crux being that while you can teach or upskill your workforce in the hard skills or the more technical skills, soft skills need to be innate and inculcated. So it needs to be sort of like a self awareness process. So those are sort of the uh, popular skills that I feel as the sector decarbonizes. And I think on your question on how does this like the skill set or the job roles compare now versus what have previously existed? In my personal opinion, and also the sort of research that I have undertaken, I would definitely feel that as we, sort of as the technology advances, like we'll have more, like new technology, new tools and equipments to deal with. Definitely the workforce would need to be, upskill themselves in those new, to be able to sort of deal with those new technologies and tools. But I would not say that the fundamental set of skills that would alter very significantly. It's like retrofitting but doing it more sustainably. It's like you are sort of having an understanding of the construction materials, but now what you need to understand is, okay, which construction materials would sort of not only enhance the energy efficiency but also reduce the footprint. So I would say the roles would not, job roles would not change very significantly. Of course, like here and there new aspects would be there, but the crux would be to do them more sustainably and efficiently.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, several handy connections made there to the focuses of some of the other speakers here. So there's the handy connection on materials to Connor, and also obviously highlighting, I think, that I guess the case for why we were interested in the training plus approach, i.e. you're a company that is VC scalable, will be focused on training, but then it might also need to be focusing on sort of perhaps it's a case of aligning with opportunities between people that are working on the front line and discovering the locations of where jobs are, kind of to Burhan's point earlier. So thank you very much for that, Didier. Very, very interesting. Over to Hannah. So Bristol City Leap is investing 424 million in low carbon projects, which is a pretty sizable amount. What is the focus of those low carbon projects, and where are you currently focusing your investments?
Thank you, Reese. Before I answer that, I'm just going to step back slightly and explain very briefly what Bristol City Leap is. So LSA had mentioned earlier the public-private partnerships. So City Leap is a public-private partnership, but it's a world first in terms of looking at decarbonisation on a city scale. So it's a 20-year concession agreement between Bristol City Council and Ameresco, who are an American-based, with a UK office, UK based and Europe based as well, obviously, energy services company. And that £424 million investment figure was what was put into the bid when they were looking at going into the partnership with Bristol City Council. So that's how much capital will be deployed, I guess, from various sources across Bristol. That's actually since been revised. I had to go away and do my homework after you mentioned this a couple of days ago. So our most up-to-date business plan, and I'll put a link in the chat to it afterwards, is actually 725 million of investment over 5 years. And that's a mixture of private, public and grant-funded money. Of that, around 420 million is coming through on the Bristol Heat Networks. So Bristol is installing a huge heat network system to supply all buildings, whatever they can connect. And around 110 million of it, the other largest chunk, is decarbonising the council's estate and social housing. So that's where the sort of majority of the work under the concession, and then the rest is infrastructure projects. And the benefit of City Leap is that you can look at whole scale decarbonisation, but also with the 20-year concession and talking to the point of skills, we have a pipeline of work that can help support skills and training and supply chain growth in the region. So amongst all of those figures, there's also a KPI to create 1,000 jobs in the region. And we can do that by providing some stability, because I think for anybody who's worked in the energy sector over the last 10 odd years, that the stability is one of the main issues that prevents supply chain growth and training. And you talked to that at the beginning in your overview of the report that you've done, that, you know, it's about the supply and demand and making sure that's consistent. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much where we're looking at. Is majority of work is heat networks and the decarbonisation, energy efficiency and decarbonisation of heat. So you know, low carbon renewable tech like heat pumps predominantly, and ground source heat pumps.
Awesome, thank you.
The only other thing I was going to say is just to speak to Divya's point as well, is that most of the work we're doing is retrofitting. So, you know, so we are seeing the constraints around the skills in the retrofitting sector that she mentioned in her response.
That's interesting. And which what sort of specific shortages are you sort of coming across? Is it regarding specifically sort of heat network expertise, or sort of other areas?
So there is a constraints within heat network expertise. I would say that heat networks, despite the sort of boom in the industry at the minute, there is you know, a lot of it's a heating tech like any other. So those skills in terms of design have always been there, but the retrofitting design element that Divya mentioned is somewhere where we are seeing constraints and bottlenecks in terms of our delivery, because the concept of trying to look holistically at a whole building when you're retrofitting is, well, I'm going to say relatively new, but there's probably people in this call who'd shut me down on that, but it's relatively new in terms of legislation. So, you know, trying to protect the whole system of your building as you're delivering is now considered best practice in terms of installation. And we are seeing bottlenecks around the design elements, that really technical elements of delivery.
That is really interesting. It's one of the opportunities that we highlighted in the report, and I think a couple of the companies that are going to speak in sort of the final segment are going to be addressing a couple of those points as well. Thank you also for the very handy context. I hadn't realized it was a world first partnership at the city level, so that's really cool to hear and exciting. It was also very exciting to hear that the funding amount is actually more or less nearly double what the estimation that we've seen on the website. So it sounds like you've got your hands full working on lots of exciting things. So Connor, as part of our research across sort of the European landscape, we were told about and then looked into the rise in a number of markets, particularly in the Nordics and Scandinavia, of or the re-rise, I guess, of traditional building practices, such as, you know, larger use of timber, in the belief that it's a more sustainable practice. You know, how has the concrete industry improved its approach to sustainable sourcing, and how do you foresee that impacting the evolution of skills in the space? Because we've been hearing quite a few comments about the material side of things, so it'd be really interesting to hear your take on that.
Thanks very much, Rhys. Yeah, look, I should say I'm in the Irish Concrete Federation now as the head of sustainability. I joined this year from Arup, where I've spent about 17 years as a structural engineer and a sustainability consultant. So I spent a lot of time trying to get my head around this topic and trying to figure out how we bring it through the process. And the first thing I'd say is, like, I'm not too hung up on traditional versus non-traditional materials. Let's say, I think even when we talk about you know, increasing use of timber, it's usually an increasing use of non-traditional timber. Let's say, you know, engineering mass timber hybrid systems, kind of modern timber frame systems, and so on. And I think that will probably continue, although there are kind of serious constraints in terms of the opportunity, the genuine kind of possibilities for that. But I think all of the materials, or anyone who's making things for construction, kind of have some of the same challenges, essentially, which are, one, I think people can expect that they need to be able to be carbon literate, and they need to be able to make decisions in a whole life cycle context. So how much insulation, we've had a bit of talk today about retrofit, how much insulation should you add? How much of body carbon are you investing now for what reduction in operational carbon over what time period and so on? People, in terms of the raw sourcing of the material, I think concrete's pretty good. It's a local material. We have kind of very strong quality controls in terms of geological testing and so on, and people know where it comes from. But I think concrete suppliers, but everyone along the chain can expect to have to be able to not just have a level of cost literacy that they once had to have. They now will have to have a sort of a level of environmental literacy. How much carbon is embedded in your product? What options have you got to reduce the carbon? How much will it cost me to reduce the carbon? But that isn't just the suppliers, that's the suppliers, the contractors, the designers, the clients, the planning authorities, and so on. And I guess the other kind of secondary point that all material suppliers deal with is that as an industry, the sort of delivery of the built environment is extremely fragmented. And so actually having a clean link along those chain is extremely difficult. Like I think one of the big parts of sourcing is, I think this is already happening, but I think you'll see it over and more over time. If you go to buy a new concrete product, I think you're going to find your supplier, and this, sorry, I should say, is true for other materials. Your supplier will have EPDs. They will be able to answer questions about carbon. However, at the moment, we essentially break that link once it's installed. So if you want to reuse a precast element, or if you want to reuse timber, or if you want to reuse a piece of plant, typically, I guess, what we essentially do is it gets taken down, some goes to landfill, some gets recycled, probably downcycled in reality. And so one of the big challenges for the entire sector is to figure out how to close that loop and not break that link, so that we can reuse those things at the same or higher points of the value chain. And the third point, I guess, and absolutely applies to concrete, but applies to all of the material and product suppliers in the industry, is how do we engage in innovation while still bearing in mind that we're producing products with a long service life that need to perform, some critical performance requirements. So I think there's a whole series of skills around, digital skills, material science, testing, more performance-based testing, and so on. And again, all of that needs, like, pretty much everyone in the chain needs to be environmentally literate, but at the very minimum, whole life cycle carbon literate. And I think that is the big challenge. How do you reduce the carbon of cement? How do you reduce the carbon of glues in timber? How do you decide it's the right timber option rather than another timber option? How do you decide that your attempt to use a, let's say, traditional material to reduce carbon isn't in fact increasing carbon? How do you ensure that that's ultimately makes sense from a whole life carbon perspective? And I think everybody in the chain needs to start getting their head around that topic. And I think that's, I guess we'll talk about it more anon, but that's one of the big portions in terms of upskilling, like literally everybody who works in the process, pretty much.
Sounds like a very big upskilling project.
It's a gigantic upskilling project, I would say. Yes, absolutely. And you'll find that, like, engineering consultancies and lots of client bodies and bigger contractors and bigger material suppliers, they're all running their own internal programs and trying to develop their own internal programs. And there's lots of external resources out there. But at the moment, it is a bit like the industry itself. It's quite fragmented. It's quite ad hoc. There's a huge variance in terms of the level of skills and how how aligned with real operational processes they are currently. So that, yeah, I think it's a gigantic upskilling challenge, let's say.
That's really interesting. And out of interest, do you have any kind of data or idea of figures when it comes to how much concrete is recycled versus put in landfill? Unless I missed that.
Well, very little concrete, I guess, goes to landfill directly. And you'll find how much of it is recycled, let's say, is incredibly dependent on the market. So you guys, I guess, are based in Southeast England. I think you'll find that there's most of it is basically crushed for reuse as aggregate. I think something like 20% of RC in London now will be we'll be using recycled concrete aggregates, but that depends. Where I am, we currently can't use it in reinforced concrete. We can only use it as a slightly lower value aggregate material. There's a big kind of that's a regulation issue, I guess, and we're sort of tied in with that. Again, if you go to the Netherlands, you'll find a lot of it is recycled. I guess what we don't do very much is reuse as opposed to recycling. And I guess, again, one of the aims for construction is obviously A, to reduce the waste we generate, but B, then to reuse rather than to every point down that hierarchy, you're using more energy and you're losing more valuable material and you're losing value, let's say. So I guess one of our aims would be to promote and kind of work with regulators to facilitate more reuse of concrete elements as opposed to recycling.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much for those insights. I mean, we have around sort of 12 minutes or so that we can use on the panel session now before we need to dive into the startups. So if you do have any questions in the audience, feel free to share. But just to sort of reopen the cycle with Burhan, which aspects of the sort of greening the built environment area that we focused on today do you consider underserved or underutilized by startups or in need of an overhaul? Are you looking at specific opportunities or shortages at the moment and thinking there's a good opportunity around?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, it's a huge sector, right? So there's quite a few opportunities that come up and present themselves. If I kind of group it and sort of do a bit of a clustering, so you've got broadly this new build section, and I think there for me the biggest area of interest is construction material data. So a lot of what Connor was talking about, right? And you've got EU regulations coming on building material data and EPD data, so you can really track the whole life carbon of your building from sort of cradle to grave. So that's a really interesting space. And what we're seeing in the US is that the regulation isn't as strong, but there's more consumer demand for this data. So I've spoken to some large global material manufacturers, and when they are tendering for tech giants to build new data centers, the tech giants are saying, okay, we'll only use products with EPDs, so we can then report on the whole cycle impact of these buildings. So that's a huge growing area. And then there's work around how do you actually produce EPDs, how do you verify them, how do you do all of this? An EPD is ultimately showing the full environmental impact of a material or a product, right? And that's a complex calculation because if you're making cement and concrete are hugely well used, and that's still complex. Then if you have other materials, say insulation fiber, where you've got more chemical and physical processes, and you've got more things going on, and the supply chains are more complex, the calculations become a lot harder. So that's for me, that's the interesting part in this new build development market. Then the retrofit market obviously is equally important because I think while we are adding, I think it's like a New York City every month in building stock. Globally, we still have to retrofit what we have so far. And the retrofit is where we have lots of room for things to change and grow. In the retrofit space, across sort of a retrofit journey, right? Ultimately, you've got assessment where you assess a building or a portfolio. Then you've got your planning stage, your financing, your actual execution stage where you do the work. And then you've got your post-work optimization, management, maintenance stage. That's how we sort of view the retrofit pipeline. Our take is that the earlier part of the pipeline is served quite heavily. There are many startups who will help you assess your portfolio. I've got 10,000 assets. What do I retrofit first? How do I do it? That space is quite over saturated. Where we're really struggling is in this later stage, in the actual doing the work, right? Because if I am a G15 housing association, and there is no point if I understand which of my assets need retrofitting if I can't do the work, right? Like you've got this imbalance in this pipeline. And so we're quite interested in the later stage of this. So doing the work itself, right? And so in your market map from earlier, you had one of our portfolio companies called EcoWorks, and they are a serial retrofit company. So Germany, lots of sort of 3-4 story multifamily houses. EcoWorks would come, do a scan of the building, build a second skin, bolt it on. You go from EPC F to A quite quickly. And that's there, the labor shortage is addressed by decreasing the capacity for labor and you're filling the need to do this work, right? But ultimately, that's what we have to upscale to deliver the green transition. There's no point in getting better financing tools because ultimately debt financing as a market has been around for thousands of years, right? So we know how to finance things. We can securitize, borrow, restructure, lease, whatever. That's all doable, but you need people to install it and do the work.
That's really, really helpful, and also very helpful to hear your take on the retrofit pipeline approach. I think that's yeah, it's a very succinct way of explaining it. So thank you very much for those opportunities. It sounds like you have your eyes on 3 or 4 different exciting possibilities there. So yeah, look forward to seeing which companies you decide to invest in next. Over to Divya. I guess, you know, we've heard quite a lot about how tightly connected regulation is with actual execution of retrofitting, of new building, and all other parts of the sector. What examples of effective sort of public-private or collaborative partnerships would you highlight as being particularly effective or most likely to bear fruit based on your research, both within in Europe and beyond?
Sure. Yeah, I think when it comes to stakeholder collaboration in sort of preparing the workforce for, like upskilling and reskilling themselves in green skills, um, the very essence of, partnerships between businesses, governments, educational institutions, training providers, it's sort of critical to ensure that, the sector's green transition is inclusive and just, in the sense that you're not leaving any community or any demographic behind as a result of the transition repercussions. So a few examples that I can highlight when it comes to green skills of public-private partnerships. One is what Singapore's Ministry of Trade and Industry, in partnership with their government skills agency, Skills Future, is doing. So they've set up a green skills committee that brings up obviously like both players from the business side as well as the training providers, with the goal of developing or upskilling their workforce in the skills that are relevant to the industry needs. And so what the committee does is that it focuses on both the immediate and market needs, and by doing this they sort of equip the workers with the necessary skills that are required as per what the business demands across different sectors. And I think a very similar example of a public-private partnership that I can share with is the Skill Council for Green Jobs in India. It's set up with the same intention of sort of upskilling the workforce in line with what the industry does. So the main aim, I would say, of these public-private collaborations is that the demand and supply gap of skills which is there in the construction or the green built environment sector, that could be bridged to a certain extent, because if you're sort of providing training to your workforce, or you're sort of educating the at the university level, or at like the high school level, in line with what is to come, in line with what the business demands or what the industry demands, then the gap, the skills gap or the demand supply gap of the skills can be bridged to a certain extent. And I think one other example that I can cite is the reskilling for employment, which is the R4E. That's actually a program that's organized by the European Roundtable for Industry. Again, that brings both industry partners, training providers, to sort of enhance the skilling ecosystem in EU, like with the aim of the twin transition of both digital and green. So these are some of the examples that I can cite.
Fantastic, thank you. It seems, to your point, it seems very hard to project skills shortages accurately within each of the roles that we've sort of defined within the report. I think if you look at Izzy's diagram where we go around the different sort of aspects of the built environment where there's the possibility of impacting retrofitting or new builds, it seems pretty clear from the conversations we've had that projecting shortages is very hard. Even CEDAFOP, the European Commission's organization on skills, was relatively unclear. They blamed their unclearness on there not being sort of accurate national level representative organizations for each of the new roles that's being defined, and therefore that, you know, a lot of the time we're kind of shooting in the dark when it comes to the number of people that are required. And I think, you know, some of the opportunities that people have mentioned around better aligning where the jobs are with where the people are obviously goes some way to solving that, and then predicting shortages based on that information is helpful. So thank you very much for those comments. Hannah and Connor, with a couple of minutes left, I'd love to know, because I feel like you've answered several aspects of the questions we were hoping to cover in the first round. If you were, you know, a startup founder operating in this space, just before we hear from some of the startup founders, love to know, you know, where you'd be concentrating your efforts. So Hannah, perhaps we could start with you and then dive into Connor's response too.
That's a really good question. I think if somebody said to me now, what business, you know, what business, yeah, if somebody actually asked exactly the question you just asked, I would say there are two areas. One is the design side of the retrofit that I spoke about earlier, but the other one actually is operations and maintenance. So, you know, the government's pushing to get all of these like heat pumps installed across the country. They're incentivizing social housing providers to install heat pumps. And I think that in Bristol anyway, in terms of supply chain to install those, we're relatively comfortable. But I know from speaking to that supply chain that they're getting calls from the likes of LG or Siemens or Daikin saying, have you got anybody out who can go out and service our heat pumps, because they don't have enough engineers and they don't have enough regional engineers. So I think if I were to do something, it would be starting up a maintenance team for heat pumps. And the same goes, the Heat Networks here has got a large water source heat pump installed, and that is, you know, really specialist kit, and the maintenance of that is complicated to provide, and that's hopefully the first of many that we're going to see going in over the next 5 to 10 years. So if you all make money out of it, don't forget me.
Brilliant, and vice versa. If you decide to start it, you've got three VC organizations here waiting to talk to you.
Okay, great.
And then the final response from Connor before we hear from the startups themselves. I'd love to know if you were starting an organization, where you'd be looking at, Connor.
Yeah, Reese, I'd say two things. So one of those actually touches on what Burhan was saying about increased kind of EPDs, etc. The direction of travel is essentially, like, for example, the new construction product regulations in the EU is essentially going to demand the equivalent of an EPD as part of the product certification for every single product sold in construction. So that process, you know, it's been growing and growing exponentially, but I think that's going to become a standard minimum over the next couple of years. Now they reckon it'll come in over the next year or two. I suspect it'll be a bit longer, but the current process for creating EPDs tends to be a bit manual. And so if you, for example, have a precast concrete plant, you might easily have 100 or 200 mixes that you use for different product ranges, and you may easily reserve the right to change them for different environmental conditions, etc. And so if you have to go through a current process, which is a bit manual and case by case, you would A, spend a lot of money, and B, spend a lot of time, and be constrained in terms of mixes for these EPDs. Whereas if you can find someone who would set up a more automated process, which technology-wise does not seem that difficult, I think that would be a hugely valuable product to a huge amount of manufacturers. And then just more broadly, I guess I would say the way I see it happening, from when we were talking about different materials, but I think irrespective of materials, is probably less operatives doing things, but more high value operatives. So, you know, more digital design, execution, looking at things right through the value, through the whole process, whole life carbon throughout that whole process, and others, biodiversity, etc. More testing, kind of performance-based design, less waste, more kind of geological input, more material technology, concrete technologists, and more holistic process. So all of that, I think, supports both tools, training platforms that sort of can follow through the whole piece. And I think that's, again, something where I think there is a real crying need at the moment.
Awesome. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to all of the panelists for those contributions. And yeah, I think it's a great time to dive into hearing from some of the startups. So gonna say thank you again and hand back to Izzy.
Fantastic. And yes, thanks again for the differing perspectives and also potential business ideas. Very interesting to hear. So for our final section, we're going to have presentations from 3 exciting startups who we've seen in this space, who will be discussing the challenges that they are attempting to solve and talking about how they are solving them. So to start with, I will hand it over to you, Becky. Becky from Fab Now. Feel free to share a screen if you've got some slides to show as well.
Super, thank you, Isabel. Just checking you can see that all right.
Perfect.
Super, thanks. So great to see that our name up on the market map earlier as well. And just I'll give a brief intro to Ferb Now and what we do, and then what we're looking to do to address some of the green skills gaps as well. So at the top line, we are a B2C company. We are focused on what's called the self-funded or able to pay retrofit market. So if you're a homeowner and you're listening to this as well, we can help you. And just to set some of the context, it's a huge opportunity in the market, with 55% of homeowners looking to invest in their energy efficiency in their home in the next 3 years. And I don't know how much some of you may know about this kind of trend within the consumer market. People are really looking to do this to better their living environment as their primary driver. They're looking to improve comfort. They want to improve their energy bills, but obviously with retrofit, it does cost a lot of money, and that return on investment can be difficult to justify. Therefore, looking at other benefits like improving comfort, improving health for your home, increasing your property value tends to be where the biggest trend tends to be. So though we see a lot of interest on the side of consumers, there's also a lot of confusion. Where do I start as a homeowner? Some of you on the call might have done this as well. I did this right at the start of my whole retrofit journey with my own home, and I'm a qualified retrofit coordinator. It's just so difficult to try and piece together fabric improvements. What's fabric enough? Do I need a heat pump at this point? Is it time for a solar panel? All these questions are so difficult to address, and we shouldn't be expecting individual homeowners or even residents that are receiving grants to be kind of addressing this problem individually as well. So that's what we're here to do, help you through that entire journey. And the opportunity is ginormous as well. If we just break down the kind of investment, and we're taking kind of a small number for investment per home, about 30k required to get homes to net zero. If we're looking at homeowners and then specifically inefficient homes, so anything below an EPCC, then we're seeing it's a ginormous market that needs to be unlocked in the UK alone. And we see the same opportunities in other markets as well across Europe, with similar housing stock challenges where the houses are cold, inefficient, and desperately need decarbonising, as well as having this consumer drive to improve the health. So going into a little bit of how we address this at Ferb Now, first point is a plan. And we've already heard a little bit about how the market is a bit oversaturated with assessments and plans, but for us, this is the kind of first engagement point for consumers to figure out what they should be doing to their home. But it's in part of an entire journey which we support through our platform as well. So the first point, we start with a plan which gives you a roadmap for net zero. We break it down into phases for exactly what you need to do for your home. So should you be starting with fabric? How does that work maybe with kitchen improvements, with an extension? It just gives you that certainty to know exactly what to do in what order. We'll connect you with finance as well. We're working with several finance providers as part of the Green Home Finance Accelerator. We see this as already discussed, as a kind of key growth lever in our business to help people spread that cost, but it's integrating that within our journey. And then the kind of our key ethos underneath everything is getting it right first time. So once you've got your plan in place, you know exactly what you want to do to your home, then we can design and install that as well. And I'll talk a little bit about the detail of what we're doing around the product to support that. And when it's done, we want to be on hand to support you afterwards as well. So when it's installed, whether you've done your fabric, whether you've done your heat pump, there's lots of different systems that are being installed. It's incredibly challenging. We haven't done so much development here, but it's something we're working on at the moment as well. And then on the other side of the platform, how we deliver things. Behind the scenes, we have a network of surveyors. In the industry, they're called retrofit assessors and coordinators. We're connected with finance providers. We have retrofit designers and installers across the whole range of measures to do that work. And then also we're currently working with several insurers as well to make sure we have a product to support you into the future if there are any problems. Just looking at the kind of proposition for every single one of them, why work with Ferb now? So with the surveyors, many retrofit assessors and coordinators, if you're in this space, are probably working in grant programs. And it makes sense because that's where the volume is at the moment. It's quite difficult to find these kind of self-funded customers. So we provide easy access to leads, and we're also building tools to help with working efficiency. I'll just focus on the installers because we're a bit short on time in terms of the other proposition. But for them, again, the same challenge, particularly in the fabric sector where they're looking to transition to self-funded customers. You've got to find those customers which are educated, have kind of a good specification for a project. So we deal with finding customers and dealing with that pre-sales and aftercare challenges, and also finding leads at a low acquisition cost for them as well, and other benefits alongside this. But I'm just going to focus a little bit about what we're doing with technology inside our platform to support these kind of areas of our supply chain. So on the surveyor side of things, with our journey, we have a home energy plan, we have design tools, we've standardized the customer journey. It just makes it super simple for retrofit assessors and coordinators to bring their skills into self-funded retrofit. So we're building tools within our platform to help enhance the experience. We're standardizing that customer journey so it's very clear what to do and what customers should expect. And we're using the data from our home energy plans and also public data sources to improve the efficiency of delivery. So Isabella rightly put us at the top right, everything we're doing is driving demand for domestic retrofit and then using data and tools to enhance the efficiency of our suppliers in that space. And then on the other hand, with installers, we're supporting, again, their efficiency. In particular, we develop survey packs to reduce the number of visits to the home. So if you're doing a project with maybe 3 installers, we'll tend to tender with 2 at least. That could be 6 additional visits to the home, incredibly annoying as somebody in the home as well, and difficult to get people to commit to come out as well. So we're basically helping to help those businesses to prioritize their time on designs rather than kind of upfront surveys when we're getting into the quoting phase and tendering phase. Similarly, we're using those retrofit coordinators to help with customer education. And we're also in the process of designing software to deal with this challenge between fabric and energy systems. So great to hear from Hannah earlier about that kind of opportunity in design. What we found is there's a real challenge between bringing together what's fabric enough and when's appropriate for a heat pump. And we need to be able to give people who are opting into this journey really good answers. So we're looking at this to improve and enhance the experience of our supply chain to be able to scale for domestic retrofit. Where are we at the moment? We're currently live across most of England and Wales as well. We started in October 2022, so just in the Midlands. You can see how we've grown in a quite short period of time. We're currently actively recruiting more retrofit assessors, coordinators and installers in all our live regions. And we're now looking to establish a lot of those gaps as well and looking to put those supply chain relationships in place, while also making sure we have B2B2C partners to continue our direct growth trajectory. But underpinning all of this, our kind of hypothesis is we want consumers to have a fantastic experience all the way throughout. And we've got to fill that gap between consumer expectation and where the supply chain is at the moment in the built environment to give that experience. And that's our kind of platform strategy behind the scenes. I think we're going to go straight into the next person. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me there, or I can answer them in the webinar as well.
Thanks so much, Becky, and really cool to hear how you're decomplicating and streamlining the retrofit journey for homeowners. And next up, we have Gunnar from Proptly. So I will hand over to you, Gunnar.
Thank you for that, and greetings from Palo Alto in San Francisco. It's 3 in the night, so this is officially the latest or earliest presentation of Proptly I've ever done in my life, so it's going to be interesting. Can you see my screen now?
Perfect.
Excellent. So hello everyone, my name is Gunnar. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Proptly, where we optimize logistics and collaboration between climate tech companies and installers in the distribution. And we're proud to be partnering with some of the world's biggest players in renewable, fueling our mission of accelerating climate tech installations at scale. So to meet our net zero goals, we need 2 billion climate tech installations in the next 5 years. This is, of course, an unstoppable trend in a $1 trillion market, and speed is essential. But right now, the industry producing and selling all these great renewable assets, such as EV chargers, heat pumps, solar panels, are struggling badly with a major issue in their deployment, which is hurting both their growth and sustainability as companies. And that is their operations and collaboration with external installers. For example, one of our customers, Future Home, who are selling and producing EV chargers in smart home, they are having 6 people maintaining and recruiting installers across their sort of geographies, costing them $480,000 annually in pure labor costs. And they are, of course, only operating in countries such as Norway and Sweden. Another one of our customers, Easy, they are operating across 18 countries. So you can imagine the scalability, the scaling issues they have working with installers. But with Proply, Future Home has gone from having 6 people navigating this to having a single person, meaning that they save 400,000 in labor costs, and they've also been able to double their installation margins. And the reason for this is that Proply is significantly simplifying and improving the operation and collaborative process with external installers. For example, for Future Home, Proply is an essential mission-critical software digitizing the entire order to installation journey, enabling them to have one single cost-efficient management platform for all their installers and installation. And on top of this, we've built a platform where they can easily recruit new installers based on data. So we are able to recruit installer across a geography, which Future Home can sort of get access to in our platform. And also they can seamlessly invite in their existing networks of installers into the platform. And of course, we built a huge data layer on top of this because we're touching such sensitive operations for Future Home, meaning they have access to understand their coverage need across geography. They can benchmark installers, look at their processes and understand where do we have bottlenecks, and lastly, understand how their customers are experiencing getting their products installed, meaning that black box is now covered. And then finally, of course, it's the installers. For them, we've created a platform where they can get jobs from several climate tech companies, meaning we're bringing them business. And they're also able to manage their existing sales channels, meaning that instead of them managing jobs currently on mail and phones, they have a single platform where they can manage both external jobs and internal jobs. And this is essentially what makes Proply unique. We are training and creating digital green installers through their most important business incentive, access to more business and the opportunity to grow their business faster, increasing both profits and revenues. And we have, of course, built a scalable business model on top of this, capitalizing on the strong network effects that are existing in this space, where both players of the ecosystem are recruiting each other into the platform. We are charging the sort of climate tech companies based on a monthly fixed SaaS, and we are tapping into every single installation. For the installer companies, they get access to the platform on a freemium, meaning they have a clear incentive again to start using the platform, but we're seeing an increased number of installers now paying for premium features, and this will of course be a huge part of our sort of business model in the future. And of course, as already been mentioned, this is a huge market, which is driven by structural trends. And there's also several close adjacencies. One of those who has been mentioned is, of course, retrofitting. There are so many businesses out there who relies on external installers delivering their products towards both B2B and B2C customers. And a lot of them are struggling with the same issues. And only after 8 months, now it's probably 9 after our product launch, we are now live with 11 companies and over 560 installer companies. Including there are the world's biggest EV home manufacturer, Easy, and German $10 billion EV charging company and solar panel company, Sungrow. And if you want to see where we end up in Q4 2026, there's only one option, and that is essentially to talk to us. The team is experienced in building commercial models in renewables, having led product development of products used by millions in Scandinavia. We've also built critical SaaS in the supply chain and also scaled a unicorn product-led growth company in Kahoot, You might have heard of them. So we are now perfectly positioned to scale our business to the next step. And of course, we're starting in the capital of climate tech adoption. Scandinavia has seen the highest adoption of products such as EV chargers, heat pumps, and smart home energy systems. And we're bringing this out to Europe. And just by with our existing customers, we have access to 18 markets where we're scaling together with them. So right now, we're pretty much ready to fuel our growth and do a huge sales push and increased product development. We are looking to raise our seed round. And if any one of you guys are having any portfolio companies or companies in your network that are relying heavily on installers, then feel free to reach out, because I think we can help them make that process more scalable and easygoing. So with that, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gunnar, and thank you for staying up so late or waking up so early for us. Great to hear about how you're improving visibility of installers for corporates and streamlining the matching process. So thanks again. And finally, we have Richard from Greenworks, who will also be taking us through some of the challenges that Greenworks are facing and addressing.
Thank you so much, Izzy. Lovely to meet all of you. So I'm Richard. I am co-founder and CTO of Greenworks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through quick whiz high level. I'm not going to spend super long on that, because lots of the high level context is stuff that you'll be already familiar with. Once I've done that, I'm going to make things a bit more tangible. I'm going to go into a few small case studies, so you've got a better idea of how things work in practice for us with our clients. And then I'm going to spend just maybe a minute or two talking a little bit about how we are thinking about international expansion and kind of what we see happening regulation-wise there. So this $3 trillion number is a number actually that was on Gunnar's slides as well. So this is how much is being spent on net zero infrastructure today every single year. So there's a huge financial shift of capital into net zero. And that is for this physical world infrastructure, which we've all been talking about. Things like heat pumps, where we need hundreds of millions to be installed. But to get these installed, we need installers to actually fit the things into the ground, into the buildings. And actually, there's a huge shortage when it comes to these installers, because globally, we need about 30 million more people for these roles by 2030. And that's essentially where we come in at Greenworks. We're building the skilled and trained workforce for net zero homes, roads, and energy systems. And we do this through our EdTech app, where we help people discover these careers and get guided through all the training that they need to thrive in employment. And it's paid for by the employers who have the urgent workforce bottleneck that is holding up their projects. And a bit about team. I used to be an early hire at a company called Multiverse, and Multiverse became the UK's first edtech company that became unicorn status officially in 2022. It was looking at the digital workforce. So how do you fill the digital skills gap for companies with things like software engineering? My co-founder, Matt, used to work at the highest levels of government. He used to work in 10 Downing Street, and he was an advisor to Theresa May in the government that legislated for net zero binding targets in the UK, and was a real kind of world leader in that respect. So that's the quick high level. So going slightly more into a couple of case studies. So what we're looking at is both about new entrants and also about reskilling and transitioning an existing workforce. Where we start with new entrants is we start top of funnel, as we describe it. So I'll bring this to life with a specific case study. So essentially in the UK, there is a 6 billion help to heat scheme, and this is increasing demand for installations. It's subsidizing the retrofit of social homes, and the government's realized this means we need a workforce, and the workforce isn't there. So, for example, there actually was in 2020 a 1.6 billion Green Homes grant, which was to help consumers make energy efficiency upgrades. And by the time that scheme was retired, almost 80% of it had been unspent, so just left on the table. So there's over £1 billion just left unspent. Why? Well, many complex reasons, but one commonly cited one was the lack of workforce. So the government's now also recognizing, hey, if we want to actually get all this stuff installed, we also need to make sure that we're getting a workforce trained up. And so the government's making money available for training. And the Installation Assurance Authority, who were actually our very first client, they won some money from government to get people trained up in retrofit. Now, the problem is most people haven't heard of retrofit. So actually, if you're thinking about building up a new workforce, if people aren't even aware of these careers, how on earth can they even begin the journey of getting trained up to then ultimately do the work and fill those skills that we need? And so we, for example, work with companies like the Installation Assurance Authority, which deliver training. They have funding to deliver training, but they just cannot find people to even train up to begin the rest of the journey. So that's one example of starting top of funnel, but then we also work directly with employers to fill their roles. And the roles might be trainee roles, sometimes they're experienced roles. And what we found with these companies is their existing ways of hiring might be, traditionally, it's literally my friend's sort of son I take on as an apprentice or something like that. That's not working anymore. So they look at things like Indeed or recruiters, but here you're just shuffling around existing supply. You're not actually increasing new entrants into the industry. And that means you have this mercenary staff and talent who might just be hopping around going to the highest bidder. And so a lot of these companies are actually recognizing the need to invest in training. Some of them are actually literally building their own training programs, but they need people to fill those roles. And so we work with them to help them identify who are the highest potential people for you to take in, how can you make sure that they have a really successful journey. And we have to date a 100% retention rate of people who we are getting into roles. And then what we're also now getting into is how you transition an existing workforce. So the use case here might be, for example, a very large company which already has, in this case, maybe over 1,000 smart meter installers. Now, smart meters in the UK are approaching saturation point. So by 2025, about 75% of homes will have smart meters installed. And so this company is recognizing, hey, what am I going to do with this workforce? I'm going to need to find something productive to shift them onto. And they see there's a growth area in domestic renewables. And so we're now starting to work with them on unpacking, well, what would that look like if you were to transition this workforce into domestic renewables? So that's a few examples of some of the specific work that we're doing. And then a little bit on the international expansion point. So something that's quite interesting is that I mentioned governments are recognizing this need for the labor supply chain. That's not just in the UK, but that's also, for example, very significantly in the US, because of course, as I'm sure we all know, there's the Massive Inflation Reduction Act. And as part of that, a relatively recently announced $40 million fund for clean energy assessors, basically, in the US, which is actually very, very similar in structure in some ways to this scheme, which I've listed above in the UK, which is where our first contract with the IAA came from. So we're really encouraged by what we're seeing in terms of routes there for international expansion. And something else that's quite interesting, though, on this is roles. Especially when you think about training, they can be slightly different regulated in different countries. So, for example, if we take an energy auditor role, in the UK, there's a domestic energy assessor qualification that's quite standard. In the US, there are countless different qualifications, all of which can count, and they are varying in length. So some might be, actually, you need to already have 5 years experience to apply for this qualification. Some are actually take a 20-hour course and you can get this qualification. So there's slightly different ways in which different countries might think about regulating certain roles. But what's very encouraging to us is a certain model, which is a teach for all model, which I know well because I trained as a teacher originally through this model where you might know Teach for America, which was this big pioneer in teacher education, the first kind of organization to challenge this orthodoxy of if you're going to be a teacher, you need to spend like 1 to 2 years in university before you go into a classroom. And this model, having started in America, is now in over 60 countries. And so many different governments have embraced it as something which they see is filling this important skills gap. And so that is something which we're really excited to see many more governments also embrace what they need to do for filling their sort of net zero transition workforce kind of skills gap. I will stop there and hand it back to Izzy.
Richard, thank you so much for sharing the work that Greenworks is doing and helping people navigate the rather complex world of green careers and the skills that they need to thrive in those industries. So thanks again, and thanks to everyone for joining, and to all those who stuck with us throughout the entire hour and a half, and also to our speakers, to the great contributions.